Welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast that equips change makers with the lessons, insights, and tools they need to drive meaningful impact. I am Catherine Alonso, and today I'm joined by two members of the Javelina team, David Waid and Justin Plumb. Welcome back to the podcast, both of you. Two of the masterminds behind the political work that we do at Javelina. And today we are geeking out about all things political in 2026 and making some hopefully really bold predictions for the year to come. David and Justin, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks Catherine. It's good to be back.
I'm super excited to talk about this because politics is nothing right now if not unpredictable. And so we are going to just jump in and talk about what you guys are seeing in the cycle to come. To start off, I'm really curious to ask you guys, when you think about this year and the midterm elections that we have on a federal level, but also things that are happening on the state and local level, is there anything that feels materially different to each of you compared to the 2024 cycle and before that?
I think it being a midterm, it's a really specific type of environment, so it's very different from 2024, but it doesn't feel all that different from 2018 to me. I'm expecting really big Democratic wins, like we saw in 2018. And I think it's a combination of two reasons. One is Trump's approval rating is really low, and the midterms are always a place where the opposition party tends to do really well. It's really rare that it doesn't happen. And number two, Democrats have continued to do better with higher propensity voters, the folks who show up in every election, especially midterms. And the combination of those two things is, the result is that I'm expecting really big wins for Democrats this year.
I think I don't think of it as this is not a new thing, but it's a more pronounced thing in this year, which I think that the sort of the fractures and divides are more pronounced than ever, right? We've all watched the partisan divide sort of growing over the years. Now, you've seen it before within the parties. It's just more pronounced now, right? Mm-hmm. So the sort of left versus center or the far right versus center, I think those are, those have always been there, but they're much more so now, I think, than they've been in the past. And a little bit of that is because of the high profile nature of the wins by Mamdani, in the last election cycle, but it's simultaneously moderates as governors in Virginia and New Jersey. And so it's kind of up there in that sense, but but I think there actually really is sort of almost a palpable feel to that that's just sort of out there in the electorate.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the two sides, the right and the left, Republicans and Democrats, are further apart. And then within those two poles, there's a lot more diversity or diversification of opinion too. So it's a lot of sort of all kind of fleeing out to the edges, leaving less overlap in the middle. And that was certainly the case in 2016, 2018. And I, for one, am like, oh, wow, my 2018 self would not have predicted that it could have gotten more and more extreme, and it seems to have done. To that point, what early signals, so we're recording this very early January 2026, what early signals are you guys paying attention to that you think will shape this year, whether it's particular policy fight, voting behavior, trends around organizing? What are some of those things that stand out to you?
I mean, I'm going to do a couple, one related to what I just said, but let me say, and this will be probably a recurring thing, the trend that I am probably most paying attention to is AI and how it interacts with campaigns. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways it can make campaigns much more effective. And there are a lot of ways in which it can put vastly more difference between the candidates and the people they're looking to get votes from. There's possibilities for less authenticity, et cetera, but there's also possibilities for much greater sort of ability to pivot and to micro target your messaging and all of those kinds of things. So I think that's really big. And I think we are seeing it. It really started in the last cycle, I guess, but it's growing exponentially fast right now. But related to what I was just talking about that sort of fracturization or fracturing of the parties, I think, there's this sort of assumption that Democrats have to decide where they're going to be progressive or if they're going to instead be centrists, right? And I don't think that that's true. I think that actually, really, what a successful candidate is going to do is figure out how to blend. Frankly, it's the best of both worlds, right? Because I think that among, what you get from a progressive campaign typically, or this is how I sort of kind of sum it up in a nutshell, is you get the passion and heart and creativity. And, there's a lot that comes from the progressive campaigns. And you saw it a lot in Mamdani, right? With you take that campaign outside of New York City, obviously it doesn't do as well, right? Because, or you put it into a swing district with more sort of moderate voters, it doesn't do as well. So that's where I think that the centrist piece of this comes in, which is better knowing the community that you are looking to represent and making sure that you're connecting to the priorities that they are concerned about, and then you're talking about them in a way that are true to you, but also still going to, be resonant with those voters. I think that, to me, those are two things that I'm kind of really curious and interested in seeing how they play out.
Mm.
So I think there's an interesting choice, and it goes into a little bit of what you're saying, David. The candidates are facing right now who are running in some of these swing seats or even primaries, and especially swing seats, where they kind of have a choice between national fundraising and sort of local campaign success. When you look at what gets you that sort of national attention and raises you a ton of money, oftentimes it's being that sort of like really progressive, out there, online, Mamdani-esque campaign. It gets people energized and gets people wanting to win. But, time and time again, we have seen, at the ballot box that those candidates tend to do less well than the candidates who are a little bit more under the radar. And I would say more focused on local issues. Like, they're not as much running as a national Democrat running to fight Trump, but they're, talking about the issues that really matter in their district. And that really matter to voters where they are. And, there's been a bunch of analyses and a bunch of debates in the last year over, who are the best candidates to run in these swing districts, to take back the House, the U.S. Senate, and ultimately the presidency, in 2028. And, some of the top overperformers, like the candidates that have done the best on the Democratic side, are the ones that most people actually don't know. It's members of Congress who have really low profiles. They go in there, they do their job, they do their fundraising, but they're not national heroes to the Democratic base. What they are is they're really good fits for their district, and they pay attention to those local issues. Meanwhile, you have candidates like Mamdani who are really successful in New York, and in New York, he only got 51% of the vote, running against a scandal-plagued governor, who is incredibly unpopular with Democrats. That's a great strategy for winning in New York and raising your national profile, but it's not a great strategy for running in a swing district in the suburbs or in a rural area. And that's a thing I'm really paying attention to, because chasing that Mamdani strategy can often win you a lot of money, but it doesn't always win you the election.
And what is one assumption that people are making about this cycle that you just think is wrong or incomplete?
So I said at the beginning that I think, I think we're setting up for this year for big wins for Democrats. Now, the flip side of that is that the U.S. Senate is really, really difficult. We, have a few seat deficit there, and the map is incredibly unkind to Democrats this year. And the odds of taking a Senate majority are really, really low. Even if Democrats have a really, really good year, take back the House by quite a few seats, just because of the map of the rural states, that are up this year, and are really because the U.S. Senate gives every state 2 senators, up every year, right? And I think we have a strategy right now that can win us the House, that can sometimes win us a very narrow Senate majority, 50, 51, 52 seats. And we take that as a win. The Democratic Party, as it is now, can win the presidency. It can narrowly win the Senate. It can win the House in the right year. But if we want to really govern the way we want to, we need to win bigger. And specifically, we need to be able to win more seats in the U.S. Senate. We need to be able to win seats in Kansas and Nebraska and Florida and all these places that we cannot win U.S. Senate races anymore. And so I think the assumption people have is that, what we're doing is fine. And I think we need to reevaluate, where we are as a party, because it may be fine, but it is never going to get us to this place of having a really strong governing majority if we cannot, get bigger numbers in these U.S. Senate races.
I'm going to go out on a limb and do an early prediction, which is that in 2026, Donald Trump is going to redistrict the lines of the states. So that, like, basically California is going to be just the Pacific Coast Highway, right? And maybe a little bit of like San Francisco and LA. It's going to be like gerrymandered, right? That's my prediction. I don't know. I could be going out on a limb, but whatever.
I wasn't, when you said it, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or not, because I actually think that could happen. Friends, I'd like to really
anything could happen. Anything could.
I spent New Year's Eve with friends celebrating the close of 2025 and the advent of 2026, and we were talking about various sort of predictions and prognostications for the new year. And one of the questions that came up was, what do you think is the craziest headline we will see in 2026? And now I wish I had said California state redrawn to now just include PCH.
That would be a pretty fun one.
Well, and I feel heartened, Justin, at your prediction of wins for Democrats, because there is the predominant narrative of 2025, at least in my little algorithmic-driven corner of the internet, is that Democrats are in shambles, and so you don't hear sort of a ton of hope. So entering this cycle, I'm curious to ask you both about both parties, Democrats and Republicans, as they're entering this year. This very important year on a federal and a local level. Where do you see each of the parties strategically, and what do you think they are thinking about the most?
I think that Trump is probably not really literally thinking about anything beyond his desk or whatever. Like, he's just thinking about himself as always. But I think that the people around him certainly will be thinking, like, how can we sort of keep our majorities so we can keep doing the stuff that we're doing? What that means is that, like, I think that his MO is to do like all the blatantly absurd things immediately, and then begin to focus on the things that are either A, going to feel like they're right for sort of working families, middle-class families, and he's going to start trying to sort of recalibrate himself as that the closer you get towards election. And I would also anticipate that we will see, this is no surprise, but we will see probably an increase in sort of ways in which he tries to put wedges between Democrats and their base voters, right? So I think that that's their path to success, because as Justin pointed out, if they kept doing the same stuff they're doing, they're going to get trounced, and I think that they know that, and so they're reading the same polls, they're going to be adjusting accordingly. So again, I think that the main kind of like wedge point for them is in fact around sort of working class, middle class families versus Democrats, quote unquote, right? And I think last cycle we saw that a lot, but it was often translated as he's breaking off African-American men or Hispanic, different, sort of subsets. But in fact, I think really he was using just the one wedge, which was getting people around those economic issues.
I think I actually disagree, because I'm totally against. I think there's been an attempt to write history as Trump is this like great politician who's won over people in the middle. And I think that he's actually a pretty terrible politician who's just gotten really lucky with the times that he's run. He's got a few things that have worked for him, but really he won these presidential elections in 2016 and 2024 incredibly narrowly and in some of the best environments that you could possibly have. He ran against a scandal-plagued Hillary Clinton after 2 terms of a Democratic president, and he runs in the highest inflation ever in 2024. The one time that he ran in a more neutral environment, he lost, to Joe Biden. He lost the popular vote pretty handily. And, he has continued to have the lowest popularity ratings of any president ever. People were talking 9 months into Joe Biden's term about how much his popularity had dropped. Well, Trump was lower than that 3 months into his term, right? He is a terrible politician who doesn't understand swing voters, who's just gotten really lucky a time here or there. And because he has, won a couple of times, he feels vindicated that he knows what he's doing. He doesn't. He continues to do stuff that's unpopular all the time. And just today, he was quoted saying people are angry about the Venezuela raid. And he's saying, this is good policy. Why don't people get it? Or affordability is a hoax. Like, he just says and does things like that he thinks are good, but he's just incredibly out of touch with the average American voter. And I think there's going to be real tough time to pay, for that in 2026 for him.
Interesting.
We do disagree. I think that, I feel like this guy gets underestimated all the time. And it's not just in general elections, it's also in primary elections. And it's also not just in his elections, it's in all the US Senate and House races that are swing seats where he comes in and manages to sort of create an environment where the Republican wins. And so I don't think that that's accurate. I think that he is smart. And in fact, to that point, I would say that it's completely cynical and it's lying, but his stuff when he made his promises about tariffs, that was all about Rust Belt states, i.e. breaking the blue wall, which he completely did. So I think that he's smart. I think they know exactly what they're doing. I think that they will know what they're doing this time around. I think there's also times when he's like a moron, obviously, like when he just says things because he's shooting from the hip. But I think generally speaking, he's got a pretty smart head on him, and the people around him do as well, I believe.
I think I agree and disagree with both of you, or I should say I agree with both of you in different ways. The one thing I think that he's very, very, very good at is the media. And there was this moment recently caught in the media, and I thought that if I had to show one moment that demonstrates what I mean by that statement, Trump is good at the media, it would be this moment. And it was just after Mamdani got elected, and he's in the White House, and the president is sitting at his desk, and Mamdani's standing next to him. And somebody from the media says to Mamdani, you have said that President Trump is a fascist. Do you believe him to be a fascist? And Mamdani starts to sort of hedge and come up with sort of a politician-y answer, and Trump touches him on the arm and says, just say yes, it's easier if you just say yes. And it was funny, it got a laugh in the room, and I thought that is why he is so good at the media, is that he understands that the country is allergic to this very politician-y way of talking that is so built into the political culture. We've all done it. We've trained our candidate. Being able to give a political answer to a question is a skill that politicians are literally trained on. And then I think every now and again you get a candidate like Obama or Trump that have such different styles but are fundamentally doing the same thing, which is not sounding like a politician and coming across as authentically themselves, one through the zeitgeist of hope and possibility, and the other through the promise of whatever Trump's thing is. And that I think he uses to his advantage over and over and over and over and over.
I agree with that.
Okay, I want to turn our attention to campaigns, trends, and tactics that we see coming up in 2026. But before we do that, let's take a quick ad break. It is such a tough time for nonprofits, agencies, and changemakers. Funding is tight, capacity is stretched, and your work matters more than ever. And you need communication support that can keep up. That's why we are super excited to introduce our new suite of modular, flexible services, built to help you and your storytelling stay visible, resilient, and connected when it matters the most. Whether you need a quick messaging refresh or adaptable on-demand support, Javelina is here to help you move forward with clarity and strength. You can see this list of services and discounted prices at javelina.co/rapid-response-services. That's javelina.co/rapid-response-services. Okay, so let's talk about political campaigns in 2026 and how we see these operating. Are there campaign strategies or tactics that you guys expect to be more important in 2026 than was the case in the past?
I think the lesson that everybody is learning from 2024 and 2025 is, that you have to be a little different. Voters are as tuned out to the news as they ever have been. You're no longer, picking between watching the evening news on CBS or NBC. You're deciding whether or not you want to watch Netflix or the news, right? And, to get people's attention, you have to be louder and more out there and kind of force yourself into it. And so I think people are going to be looking for ways to do that and to really be kind of, authentic is the key word for me. Like, sound like a normal person and meet people where they are. A lot of times that's social media. It might be sporting events. From a paid advertising lens, so much of that is going to be OTT and streaming, paying to be on the ads between somebody's Hulu or YouTube videos, because that's where people are now.
I agree with that. And I think that a thing that often frightens candidates, but I think is really true, especially in this environment, is that you shouldn't be afraid to take positions that are not necessarily 100% consistent with orthodoxy, right? Like, basically, if you take a position that is the one that you believe in, it's more authentic. And in fact, there has been polling going back many decades that shows that where people see somebody taking a stand that shows that they have something that they believe in and that they won't take a step back from it, they might like lose on the individual issue, but they go way up in a whole other dimension, which is just sort of respect for their integrity, right? And so I think that people should honestly probably even look for some places where they can be a little bit different. Again, honestly and authentically, right? Like, what is it about them that they might not disagree with XYZ sort of position?
Well, let me ask you about AI and innovation and campaigns. So what I've said to people many a time, and you guys can tell me if you disagree with this, is that campaigns don't tend to be particularly on the cutting edge of innovation, because in a candidate situation, let's just say it's two candidates running against each other in a head to head. Let's say it's a competitive race. You have one shot, you have one amount of money, and it is a risk to do something new, especially if your opponent sticks to the tried and true. And so it can be very, very risky. And even from a digital marketing perspective, our non-political clients were integrating digital advertising into their strategies in a really seamless way, I think 4 to 6 years before our political campaigns were doing it. And so, A, do you guys agree with that? And B, do you see that slowing down the adoption of AI technologies and tactics in political campaigns?
I do agree with that. Having been there, been a campaign manager, and people come to you with all sorts of fakakta ideas of what you should be investing your money into, right? And I'm like, yeah, thank you very much. I'm just going to do the stuff that gets votes in the door. But, now we saw, I think in the last cycle, a broader use of AI than we've ever seen before. And I think that here's a prediction. I mean, I don't think it's terribly bold, but I think in this next cycle, having gone through one cycle already where people saw its effect minorly, and by the way, in every single cycle, we're already 4 times beyond where we were in the last cycle, right? Like, it's moving that fast, right? But I think that my prediction is that in this cycle, you will see a lot of AI integration into federal campaigns, maybe gubernatorial campaigns, but I think then it'll take yet one more cycle for people to be like, okay, I feel that the impact of this, and I can't not do it. I'll be giving away an advantage to my opponent because they're going to do it. So I think it's how much it's delayed, a cycle or two, maybe.
So I agree with that, David. And I actually think that that's a little bit of a mistake, and here's why. I think you really need to be in tune of what your chances are in a district, right? If you are the favorite to win, I can totally see. Let's take a conservative approach. Maybe you have a federal race, you have polling, you know you're doing well. Taking a conservative approach can make a ton of sense, right? And not wanting to risk that AI agent going out there and saying something that's really going to make you look bad. I think if you're running on a more local level and you've got, a tough budget, or, you're running in a place that is really difficult for a Democrat, you should be saying yes and taking all of the risks, right? Because, if you're in a place where Kamala Harris lost by 25 points, running the Kamala Harris playbook is not going to work for you, right? So try that AI strategy. Try talking about those issues that maybe aren't as mainstream in the rest of the districts, because if you're not willing to take risks at that local level or in those tough districts, like, you're going to lose, and so I think that's an important thing to take into account is, what are your district, what are your chances? Like, the Hail Mary in football is not a good play, but you do it when there's 5 seconds left and you're 60 yards out because you got nothing else.
Well, I like that analogy a lot. And I think another scenario where experimentation could be really worthwhile as well is if you're a candidate that is running ahead, as you said, Justin, and you as a candidate have ambition for a more competitive race in the future, whether you're running in a different district, you want to run statewide, you want to run federally, and whatever you're running for now, you're in a fairly good position. Now would be the time to experiment and innovate to set you up for future success, whether that is ways to connect with new voters, build your social media following. And one of the things about politics is that it is so short term. The thinking is so short term. It's just about the next victory. And you really do not see this long-term planning that we really, with our candidates that we work with cycle after cycle after cycle, we really try to bring that to the table, which is how we setting you up for short-term success, but also looking 2 or 3 cycles down the line to get you to where you want to be. And I think that AI and other technological developments can help candidates with that. And then on the flip side, are there tactics you think campaigns are still over reliant on, even if they're less effective in our 2026 age?
Sometimes I think it depends on what you're running for. There are tactics I think that make sense for certain kinds of races and not for others. So if you are running for city council in a small town, or running for the state legislature in the suburbs, I think there can be an over reliance on things like social media and press followings that really just people are not following those sorts of things, for your race. If you are running for mayor of New York City, you can get some attention. If you're running for president, you can get some attention. If you're running for U.S. Senate, you can get some attention. But, I think that there can be this belief sometimes that the sort of Mamdani effect of going viral on social media is going to work in your state legislative district in the suburbs. It's not. In that case, you have to go back to the sort of traditional tried and true tactics of fundraising and spending money on those digital ads, maybe TV, maybe direct mail, depending on what's right for your district, because you have to get in front of voters. Relying on some of those new tactics doesn't work as well when it requires people to really seek you out in the newspaper or on social media. And if you don't have that compelling hook, and oftentimes that's the race that you're running for, high profile enough for people to really want to seek out that information, that's important. And I see it all the time talking to candidates who are running these races that feel like they need to have these big social media operations, and they get like 100 views on their social media page. You could have been knocking doors and talking to real voters and meeting people where they are.
So I want to follow up on this because I mostly agree with you, but I think there's some yeah buts. So somebody listening will be thinking, yeah, but what about AOC, who was running for the state legislature, I think, when she initially blew up? She blew up on social media from an ad that she did that went viral. And that support arguably has been the wind in her coattails for what has become a very prominent political career. And then there is a state senator in Arizona, Annalise Ortiz, that has a very good social media following. And I have no idea, no way of saying whether it translates into votes in her district. But if she wants to run statewide, usually it can be a tough jump. And I think the investments that she has made in her social media, not just following, but in her persona online, will serve her very well. And so I'm curious if you have any pushback to my pushback.
I think the thing I would say to that is I think you can find great examples of people who really excel at social media. Annalise Ortiz is one, AOC is one, Mom Donnie is one. But for every candidates who try, there's like
Right.
two who are really, really good at it and break through. I think that there's like a charisma and a skill when it comes to social media. And that's an avenue for people. And it's not an avenue, I think, for most candidates who would be great in other ways or will be great office holders. And so it can be something that's worth a try sometimes. But for every Annalise Ortiz in Arizona, there's 90 members of the state legislature, and the other 89 are nowhere near as good as she is. And they've all been elected too. So,
yeah, I think that's the right answer. And, I think another one I would add to that list of outliers is Gavin Newsom. But Gavin Newsom has the funds to hire a very robust social media team. He is not doing his own TikTok. He has built out a team of, I'm going to go ahead and guess, younger people who are social media savvy who are doing that on his behalf. And so I think sometimes social media gets thrown out a little bit for political campaigns and so told it just doesn't translate into votes. And I do think that is true. And I think it's more of a case by case basis.
I am not going to push back to the pushback to the pushback, but I think what I want to say is that I agree. And I guess that if you're a candidate out there listening to this, what I think you have to do is be just really mercilessly honest with yourself. Because I think a lot of times candidates that I talk to who are like, social media is going to be like key for me, are hoping really what they're saying to me, and as I'm hearing it, is I don't want to make phone calls to raise money, or I don't want to go knock doors and talk to people I don't know. And in fact, the reality is you're going to have to do those things. And it's not a replacement for that. This is something that, as these guys have said, if it takes off and does great, first of all, there's an incredible amount of hard work and time that goes into making that happen. Right? It's not like the overnight success is really almost never an actual overnight success. So it's not an easy way to get to anything, A, but B, it's not going to be an easy way to get you out from under the rock of having to make phone calls to raise money. Guaranteed, AOC is making phone calls and doing call time and walking door to door. Well, actually, she lives in an area where you probably can't do a lot of door to door, but she's standing at subway entrances and actually talking to voters.
It kind of reminds me of this exercise we do with almost all of our candidates and even some of our nonprofit and non-political candidates, is you're kind of doing a pluses and minuses activity where it's like, what are the things that the candidate and the race have really going for them, and what are their challenges? And oftentimes we're listing pluses. The candidate's really good at X, the candidate's really good at Y, but they've got challenges in ABC different areas, right? And if the candidate is really awkward on camera as one of the minuses, social media is not for you, right? And so you have to do that kind of activity for yourself. Like, what are the things that you as a candidate are really, really good at and really strong at, and fit with the district and fit with the race that you're running on, and leaning into those things. If you are really good one-on-one at the doors, you got to have a good field plan to knock as many doors as possible. If you are really good on social media and really good on camera, figure that out too. You have to know your strengths.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's the solid advice, and sort of that case by case thing I was going by, is that there actually isn't a one size fits all. Here's one thing I do know when it comes to social media: attempting to go viral is a strategy doomed to fail. And so if that is a part of your approach, I would take it out and go back to those strengths that Justin mentioned. So what kind of candidates do you guys think are going to resonate best with voters in 2026, and why?
I think it's going to be candidates that do what I think I've talked about earlier in this podcast, which is that they manage to bring the heart to their campaign and heart encompasses a lot of things, but that's passion, that's authenticity, that's a whole bunch of stuff. But you know what that is? That's essentially the non-intellectual connection with voters, right? Is in my mind is the heart argument. And I think successful candidates are going to be the ones that meld the heart with the right targeting and knowing what the right priorities are that voters care about. And that can be hard to do. It's much easier said than done, but I think that's what people should be striving for.
I think it's candidates who know who they are and understand their voters. A strong candidate who knows the tactics that they're good at, like we just talked about, but also to David's heart point, knows the things that they care about and that they can really be authentic and passionate about. Voters can smell inauthenticity. So what it is that really motivates you, what it is that really excites you to run for office and do these certain things. And then also, what do your voters care about? What are the issues that are top of mind for them and what they're looking for? If you know who you are and you know who your voters are, you are going to do well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, when you think about what are the issues that I'm passionate about, you might come up with very specific things, right? Like, so I'm making it up, but let's say that a person's thing was, I think we need an increase to the minimum wage, or, we need to do something with tipped wages in Arizona, right? Something like that. And maybe that's not the thing that is on every voter's mind, right? So how do you handle that, right? Like, there's the things that you're passionate with doesn't really apply directly to how voters, what voters are looking for in this particular election. So it might be that what you need to do is look at what is the underlying principle there, right? And it's about fairness, and it's about supporting working people, and, labor, and see where that can maybe translate in bring that same passion to things that are just adjacent and maybe more resonant with the voters. So I think you have to be, it's a little sort of skill in terms of figuring out, which of these things, and it's skill / knowledge from a poll, or from having read millions of polls, but just getting a sense of what is it that we need to focus in on that will allow me to bring my heart to this.
I totally agree that that's an really important trade-off. And the one thing I'll caution for folks as they are thinking about their message and their brand and running for office and matching that to voters is the key differentiator. We now live in this world where there's people who are really actively trying to avoid politics on a day-to-day basis. Like, they don't want to pay attention to the news. They hate politicians. They're just so turned off and distrusting and negative about the whole system. And by nature, most folks running for office, they follow the news, they follow politics. They are really sort of invested and care and believe that they can make a change. And oftentimes those swing voters, those persuadable voters in the middle are the complete opposite on that. And, that's just a place where candidates and voters are oftentimes really out of touch from each other, just on a core basis, and trying to understand how to work around that and finding the common ground between those two groups is really important. Assuming that those voters care about things in the same way that you do is mistaken, because you're running for office and they're not.
Right.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. Super true. And I think one of the things that we talk to our non-political candidate clients, so more of our non-profit and organizational clients, about a lot is the judgment that comes with that. So a lot of people, you said, Justin, a lot of people are sort of opting out of politics because it makes them feel bad to read the news. And so they are reading less. And I know on a personal level, my consumption of political and news-driven content has plummeted compared to previous years because it makes me feel bad. And there tends to be in political and social change circles this judgment of people that do that and it's sort of this global they are lazy, they are stupid, they don't know what they're talking about, and this idea that there are people out there that are uninformed or misinformed. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is bringing some compassion to that, where I don't think large in part the global person, or to use another word, voters, are any of those things: lazy, misinformed, disinformed. I think that they are busy. I think that they are under incredible stress on a personal and professional level, and they are doing the best that they can. And so one of the things I try and remind people that are working in social change, whether that's political candidates or the ecosystem that exists around them, is to really bring some compassion to those people that you're trying to reach, rather than start from a place of judgment.
That makes sense. And I want to add also to this, I think that this thing about, like, we often are thinking what's important to me, right? That is pretty much the underlying rationale for conducting a poll, right? Because you're going to actually ask people and you're going to get a statistically relevant sample, and you're going to be able to figure out what people actually are believing. But let's say you're running for something and there's no way in hell you're going to be able to afford a poll. Well, there's an answer for that too, which is talk to people that are not in your little echo chamber, right? Because that's the biggest danger. Oftentimes, especially on social media, people start talking and you're talking to all your friends who believe exactly like you. And I've seen it happen a million times where people are like, well, everybody thinks this. Well, that's everybody in your little social network thinks that. But the reality is not everybody thinks that. And the only way you ever will sort of see it and believe it is by going out and doing something to find out about it. So that could be just literally sitting down at a coffee table with somebody who's just 100% not like you, but yet represents the people that are swing voters in your district. Or it could be door knocking. But if it's door knocking, don't let it be only primary voting Democrats, right? Because they will believe mostly like you. Right. But if you have to win a general election, you better be talking to folks that are more in the middle, either independents or Republicans who are sort of swing voters.
I have really enjoyed this conversation. I've really enjoyed geeking out with you guys about what 2026 is going to be like, what's going to unfold, and what we can learn and predict from this political moment that we're in. Before we sign off, though, the moment that everybody's been waiting for, I want to ask you each for a bold political prediction for the year ahead.
I'm willing to go first on this one. I think a lot of times when you sort of hear this question, a lot of people get really super safe. But I am going to approach this differently. So my prediction is that in 2026, Donald Trump is going to be a dick. Other people may say, other people may say, no, that's not true, David. What are you talking about? But I have to stick to my guns on this. No, but seriously, I think this is probably I actually perfectly agree with what sort of Justin had been talking about earlier, which is that, we've got a really good chance in 2026 to take the House, probably not so much the Senate. But I will go a little bit further out on the line and say that I think that in this year in Arizona, Democrats will take one of the two chambers, maybe two, but probably one of the two chambers in the state house.
That would be really cool to see. That's been on the precipice for as long as I have been involved in Arizona politics.
Absolutely. And I have drunk so much of that Kool-Aid, it's like, it's in me now. I am fully invested in that.
Justin, how about you?
I agree with your prediction, David. I'm going to go in a field direction in my 2026 prediction. You were talking earlier about sort of the divides in the Democratic Party between left and center and these different factions and groups. I actually think some of that is going to get papered over in like the excitement of beating Republicans in the midterms. It's going to really unite people, and really the drag out knife fight is going to be in this upcoming presidential primary, where you're going to have so many factions. We've already seen a ton of candidates who are putting themselves out there. In Arizona, both of our U.S. senators are rumored that they're going to be running for president. You've got the big guns like Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom, and everybody and their mother is talking about it. And I think that somebody is going to be bold enough and go out there that before the midterms this year, we're going to have a major candidate kind of in that tier below Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris announce that they're running for president at some point this year.
Do you have any theories as to who that will be?
I don't have any theories, but I think it's going to be somebody in that tier of like, I've got a real shot, but I really need to make a name for myself. Like Gavin Newsom, he doesn't need to announce this year because everybody already knows who he is. Like It might be in somebody that in that U.S. Senate governor area of folks who don't have as much a national stage, like somebody on that tier similar to Ruben Gallego or Mark Kelly, who they've got a real shot but they really need to get their name out to jump up a tier. And, that's the kind of person I can see announcing they're running this year.
And from a campaign consulting point of view, what do you think the advantage would be for that person to do that this year versus like January of 27?
I think when you're on that level, you just have to stand out and make yourself unique.
I see.
And, if you announce this year that you're running, you have made yourself unique. Anytime, the news starts to talk about 2028, they have to include your name in the story because you're the only, guy or gal who, has announced that they're running. And, it makes everybody else start to, go in their brains thinking about, what to do next. So, I would be out there if I were working with a candidate in that range saying, yeah, let's put together a really specific plan about when to do this. And let's do it early to make you stand out.
Well, you heard it here first. By this time next year, Democrats will have won the House, maybe the Senate. The House or the Senate in Arizona will have a exciting up-and-comer announced for presidential candidate, and Donald Trump will be a dick.
So we're guaranteed one of those.
Well,
you got to do a prediction.
Okay. This is an Arizona prediction, and it's something that really doesn't get talked about very much. But for the first, because I think everybody's forgotten, but for the first time, there will be a lieutenant governor on the ballot this year running with the governor. So it'll be Katie Hobbs running, she's the incumbent, and then there's a slew of candidates running for the Republican nomination. And my prediction is that the lieutenant governor candidates will be consequential in who wins. And I think that is a bold prediction because usually it doesn't. Like the lieutenant governor, vice president, it gets made a lot of, and research shows it really does not influence people's choices. And I think in Arizona, because of the newness of the position, and because of the unique makeup of our state and this sort of the high number of competitive districts that we have, I think that it will have an impact not only on the governor's race but potentially down ballot too, without knowing anything about who those lieutenant governor candidates will be.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Do you have any guess as to who it will be? And the other thing I've been thinking about is when is Katie Hobbs going to announce who her lieutenant governor is going to be?
So this is fascinating because I don't know if you guys are hearing anything, but I'm not hearing a lot of buzz about this. Like it's not being talked about. If this has been decided or even discussed, I am not aware of it. Like it seems to be flying very under the radar. I wonder if my only prediction would not be that it's a person, but it'll be an issue-based person. So I could see there being a very strong argument to be made to the person that Katie Hobbs selects to be somebody who has a background in border security.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I feel like, this is getting into truly impossible to predict kind of zones because there's a million calculuses that could go into this decision. But I was thinking a border sheriff Democrat would be a smart choice for her. Now, if she wants, on the other hand, to make her campaign really about education and like the ESA's craziness, finding somebody who's in the education space might, make sense. And that's why it could really be anything. But I think that what you just pinned on is probably the one that I would think needs most.
Another one would be if you are going like issue position, it would be someone that speaks to and has a record that aligns with something to do with cost of living and economic. Because I truly think that is actually going to be the biggest driving of voting behavior this year. But of course, that's a harder thing to find. Like border security as a job is much easier to identify than you don't want an economics professor. So what is the job of somebody that speaks to the voter when it comes to affordability? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's some kind of businessman or somebody who leads like a job training program. You've got me thinking in this angle of somebody who's sort of like not a politician.
Yeah.
that could be good. The other challenge with that is you want your lieutenant governor to be somebody that voters can feel like, yeah, that person can be governor, right? And if you pick somebody that's like totally out of left field, that can be a concern. It's a really interesting conversation. And like you, Catherine, I haven't really heard really much of anybody talking about who the governor is going to pick and really when, because they don't have to announce until after the primary at the end of July, but the governor is an incumbent. She could announce tomorrow if she wanted to. So,
right.
We'll see.
Yeah, and that'll be for the political consultants working with Governor Hobbs. The timing of that is going to be a very strategic determination, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one thing is for sure, other than Donald Trump being a dick, is that it's going to be a really interesting year to watch. So I'm going to listen back to this time next year and see how right we were. But I hope that some of these come true, but because you guys have given me way more hope than I thought you were going to. So
Good.
Thanks so
All
much,
right.
guys. This was awesome.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.